Welcome. In this video, we're going to discuss problem solving. So we'll discuss 3 different problem solving strategies. By the end of the video, you should be able to explain what an algorithm and a heuristic is, and we'll explain some common roadblocks to effective problem solving and decision making. So we're going to start off talking about these 3 different problem solving strategies: trial and error, an algorithm, and a heuristic. Now, trial and error is probably the most intuitive. You can think about it in terms of you try something, it doesn't work the first time, so you figure out what you can do next time to make it different or better, and hopefully by the end you get the result that you want. So we're going to talk about all 3 using cookie baking as an example. So let's say you don't have a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, but you know the basic ingredients. You know there's eggs, butter, flour, baking powder, sugar, salt, vanilla, chocolate chips. So the first batch you make, the cookies are too hard. So you make another batch and you reduce the amount of flour. They're a little better, but still not right. So now you swap out the baking powder for baking soda. And then this third iteration of your cookies, they are perfect. So that's an example of trial and error. Of course, that could take a long time. If you look up here, look at all the different trials they went through. So how could you use an algorithm to make the cookies? So how would you use an algorithm to make the cookies? So an algorithm is going to be a set of instructions for accomplishing a task that produces a given solution. And you don't need to understand how it works or why it works. So let's say you use a tried and tested recipe. My favorite recipe is on the back of a Toll House chocolate chip cookie bag. And you don't need to understand why you add a certain amount of baking soda, or why you add so much flour, or why the salt or the butter should be at room temperature. You don't need to understand all that. You just need to follow the instructions, mix it together how it says, put it in the oven, and you should get good chocolate chip cookies. Now, how about a heuristic? Heuristics are rules of thumb. They're going to suggest a course of action, they're going to guide problem solving, but they don't guarantee an optimal solution. So for baking cookies, we'd have to have some rules of thumb. We know that brown sugar makes cookies a little chewier, a lower temperature allows the cookies to bake evenly, chilling the dough prevents the cookies from spreading out too much. So we apply these principles to our cookie baking, and it turns out to be the best cookies. There was a risk though. They might not have been the best cookies because we're using mental shortcuts. And so these heuristics allow us to solve problems quickly and make decisions quickly, but again, it doesn't necessarily guarantee the right outcome. So now we're going to talk about some heuristics and biases. The hindsight bias is often referred to as the I knew it all along bias. In other words, you knew it all along that your best friend and her boyfriend were going to break up, or that couple X would get divorced. It's the inclination to see events that have occurred as more predictable than they really were before they took place. So in other words, the tendency to overestimate your ability to predict an outcome once the outcome is already known. If you know your friend broke up with her boyfriend, of course it's easy to say, I knew it all along that they were going to break up. Hindsight bias is common in medicine, in relationships, in games, in politics, and there's this famous saying, hindsight is 20/20. I'll let you check out this meme up here. Some other common sayings are, we're all Monday morning quarterbacks. So it's easy, not just for football, but for any sport, is after the game is over to say, I would have done this, or we should have done this. So it's easy to see after the game is all said and done, what could have been done differently to maybe win that game. And so again, the same, it's common in sports, it's common in politics, medicine, all sorts of different areas of our life. Another bias is the confirmation bias. And the confirmation bias is the tendency to pay attention only to information that confirms your beliefs and ignore the evidence that contradicts your beliefs. So, for example, your friend had a professor last semester and that they said was horrible and super hard. But unfortunately, that was the only class that you could get. You walk into the class the first day and the professor has technical difficulties. You check that off as evidence your friend was right. The professor, however, is able to continue with the class, deliver all the needed information that you needed for the day, and you're ignoring the fact that your friend never goes to class, never studies. So you decide that your friend was right, the professor is horrible, and you are off to a bad semester. So again, your beliefs are professor is bad. The evidence shows that the professor is not bad, but you're ignoring that. And the only evidence you're going to pay attention to is the evidence that supports your own beliefs. The evidence that in this case, that the professor had technical difficulties, so they must be a bad professor. Another heuristic we'll talk about is the availability heuristic. This is the tendency to judge a probability of an event by how easy it is to think of examples. So let's say you've just moved to Southern California from the Midwest. You arrived in July to get settled, you're excited to frequent the beach before you start school, and you hear about a recent shark attack in Del Mar. So you've decided not to go to the beach, even though, statistically speaking, shark attacks are very rare. The idea is that shark attack is available in your mind, and it makes you misjudge the probability of how likely you are to actually get attacked by a shark in the ocean. The next heuristic we'll talk about is the representative heuristic. So this involves using stereotypes and our concepts to make snap decisions about a person. So you're comparing what you're evaluating to an existing prototype or stereotype. It allows us to make snap decisions based on appearance or personality. And again, because that heuristic is that rule of thumb, it helps us to make quick decisions, but it can sometimes keep us from making the right decisions. The representativeness heuristic involves using stereotypes and our concepts to make snap decisions about a person. So you're comparing what you're evaluating to an existing prototype or stereotype that you have. Remember those concepts that are linked together by those propositions, and that prototype is kind of your best, most typical example of that concept. So you make snap decisions based on appearance or personality. And while again, these heuristics are rules of thumbs, they help us make decisions quickly, they can also sometimes keep us from seeing the truth. So let's use this example. Imagine you were set up on a blind date and your friend didn't tell you much about the person, except that they were a student at Orange Coast College and they lived in Huntington Beach. You get to the restaurant and you see a very tan man sitting at the table. You immediately make the assumption that he is a surfer. Of course, in reality, he just got back from a mission with his church, building houses for people in a third world country. So again, while these heuristic and biases help us make quick decisions, they are not without their limitations. They can often keep us from thinking critically. These heuristic and biases are often so ingrained in our thinking that we don't realize that we're affected by them. And they can keep us from using other skills we have in front of us to actually solve the problem at hand. So a mental set is the tendency to try and solve a new problem by using procedures you've used in the past. So an example might be a child enters a store by pushing the door open. Every time that child comes to a door, after that, he pushes the door, expecting it to open. However, eventually, the child comes to a door that won't open by pushing it. The child gets frustrated, keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and then throws a fit because the door won't open. Well, what do you think needs to happen? This door needs to be pulled open. The child has a mental set for opening doors and isn't trying to solve the problem of the door not opening by using anything but this mental set. Now I'll say at OCC, there's a similar issue that I think all of us professors come across again. In the copy center, most doors, when you come across it, you do push them open. In the copy center, you get to the copy center doors and there's a sign that says pull, but every time you try to start to push it and then it's like, oh, and the sign even says pull, and then you got to pull it open. So in a mental set, we're trying to find patterns in events. And then once we find that pattern, it's hard to break out of that pattern to actually solve a similar problem. Functional fixedness is a specific type of mental set where you're only able to see solutions that involve objects in their normal or expected manner. For example, imagine that your vacuum cleaner has stopped working. When it has stopped working in the past, a broken belt has been the culprit. Since past experience has taught you that the belt is a common issue, you immediately replace the belt again. But this time, the vacuum continues to malfunction. So let's try to think of some other uses for a hair tie. Let's see if we can get around our mental set and our functional fixedness. Because most of us are going to use a hair tie well, girls at least, or males with long hair, are going to use a hair tie to pull our hair back. But what else could we use it for? Maybe to hold a door open, to close off a loaf of bread or a bag of chips, to bundle silverware when you're packing it. Actually, a lady at my son's football game the other day was using a hair tie to hold her umbrella to the fence.